Erica Lyon, Agriculture and Natural Resources Educator for Ohio State University Extension here in Jefferson County. I also cover Harrison County as well. Today we're going to talk a little bit about soil testing. You might be thinking, well, why do I need to get my soil tested? Can't I just throw down fertilizer as I need it when my plants are starting to die? But the problem with that method is that we don't quite know how much fertilizer our soil needs just by looking at it. And when our plants start to wilt or show other signs of a disease or nutrient deficiency, it might not be that there's too little fertilizer. Sometimes it could be that the area is over-limed or there's actually too much fertilizer. Before we start to take soil samples, let's first look at soils found here in Jefferson County. A vast majority of the county is made up of shale, siltstone, mudstone, and clay. These shale layers often result in acidic soil conditions, and many farms and gardens require applications of lime to raise the soil pH. In some places, a limestone layer of bedrock may also be present. These areas will tend to have a pH closer to neutral. Alluvial deposits, which are often found on the eastern side of the county along the Ohio River, consist of a mixture of sand, gravel, silt, and clay. Here, topsoil tends to be thin, or in places where mining occurred, possibly buried. Much of our organic matter, surface soils, and root mass are located in the top part of the soil profile, in what is referred to as the O and the A layers. Beyond these layers are the subsoil, which lack organic matter and are not suitable for growing crops when brought to the surface. And below the subsoil is the parent material or bedrock, which often affect the soil pH. Outside of knowing how much fertilizer is needed, soil testing and applying fertilizer based on a soil test reduces issues with runoff and leaching that can lead to harmful algal blooms. Harmful algal blooms, or what we might call HABs, occur when microorganisms like cyanobacteria are able to feed on water pollutants such as phosphorus and grow out of control. These organisms can produce toxins that are harmful and often deadly for people, fish, livestock, pets, and wildlife. What is fertilizer for plants is often considered fertilizer for other photosynthetic organisms as well. And while commercial agriculture receives much of the blame, gardens and lawns also experience significant runoff that contributes to the pollution driving these blooms. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started with taking a soil test. Now I'm at a site where we can see that we have quite a bit of turf. There's a little bit of clover here, quite a bit of weeds, so sometimes we want to get our soil tested to tell maybe our soil's not quite right for sustaining the plants that we want, and instead it's sustaining the plants that we don't want. So the soil here is fairly rocky. We actually had a hard time getting the soil probe into the ground earlier, but let's say we wanted to know what we could do to the site to improve the turf. Well, what I would want to do is take a core. For turf, you want to go down about 4 to 6 inches. There we go. All right, so here we can see we have our, I would almost call that 5 inches. Ideally, I would have this soil probe marked off. You don't necessarily need to use a soil probe to get a soil test done. You can use just a garden trowel. But one of the main things that you have to do is make sure that you remove any roots, rocks, organic matter when you're collecting your samples. Now this that I collected right here is considered to be a subsample. At this particular location, we can see that we have one section that is primarily open and relatively flat, and another that is forested along a hillside. If we want to have an idea of soil fertility for the whole area, sampling here would require a minimum of 2 soil tests, one for each side of the creek.
Areas with different land uses or histories, such as lawns, flower beds, orchards, among others, or areas that have differences in soil features such as soil texture and drainage, will each need to be sampled separately with its own soil test kit. Sampling should occur every 2 to 3 years depending on soil type, and it should be scheduled around the same time of year. For example, if you take your first soil test in the fall, plan to take future soil tests in the fall as well. This way you can compare and see how soil fertility has changed over time.
Here's the core that we just sampled. You can see that we have a darker colored layer on top that consists of roots and other organic matter. Throughout much of the site, the topsoil layer was fairly thin. It did not take us more than 6 inches to reach rock when collecting this sample. First thing I am going to do is remove this top organic layer and any roots and rocks that are found within this core. Once the organic layer and rocks have been removed, the top 4 inches of the core is taken and placed into a clean container. A 5-gallon bucket is often preferred, but any clean plastic container will do. Avoid brass, bronze, or galvanized tools as they may affect the results. Avoid containers with lime and fertilizer residues as they may contaminate the samples and provide an inaccurate picture of the sample's soil fertility. So here is our soil cores. This is 10 total. What we're going to do is, once again, remember we got to remove all the organic matter. So I'm going to pick out all the grass. Here we've got a piece of a worm, so we're going to go ahead and get rid of that guy. Whoops. All right, and then we want to break up these cores, so that way we get an even consistency. You can see here we've got some rocks. There's still a little bit of leaf material. As much of that as you can get rid of as possible is best. Here is what the consistency should look like before the soil is set out to dry. Let's take a look at the soil texture while we wait. Sandy soils have large particle size compared to clay, causing it to feel more gritty. Silt-based soils tend to fall in between these two categories for particle size. Soil texture plays a role in how frequent fertilizer applications are needed to be made, as well as how nutrients are lost. For example, sandy soils are prone to leaching compared to silt and clay-based soils. The soil texture triangle helps us determine what type of soil a location has, whether it is loam, silty clay, loamy sand, among others. Let's say, for example, we had a soil containing 40% silt, 20% clay, and 40% sand. If we follow the lines to where the three intersect, we find that this site has loam textured soils. To get a more accurate idea of the texture of soils, use a jar test. To do a jar test, fill a mason jar half full with soil. Add 1/2 jar of water on top and shake the jar until the particles are suspended. If we wait until all of the particles are settled, we will see that they divide out based on size. Larger particles such as sand settle first, followed by silt, then clay. We can get an estimated percentage then using the soil texture triangle to determine the type of soil present. Or we can use the USDA's Soil Surveys or Web Soil Survey tool to estimate the soil type at the location we want to sample at. Once we have our soil sample mixed, allow soil to dry overnight on parchment or butcher paper. Make sure to avoid newspaper or colored paper. Soil is ready to send into the lab when the lumps can be crushed into smaller sizes. Go through the sample once again to remove all the roots and rocky material. Take 1 cup to 1 pint of soil, add it to the kit bag, and ship with the accompanying form. Results are often returned within a few days, up to 2 weeks. The report received back will vary depending on the lab samples were sent to. At the minimum, reports should list soil pH, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium, and the cation exchange capacity of the soil. Most plants do well with the soil pH between 6.3 to 6.8. Soils with a pH lower than 7 are considered to be acidic, while soil pHs above 7 are considered to be alkaline. A soil pH outside of this range will have nutrients tied up and inaccessible to plants, leading to nutrient deficiencies that can't be corrected with fertilizer alone. For more information, check out the fact sheet, Soil Testing for Ohio Lawns, Landscapes, Fruit Crops, and Vegetable Gardens, available at ohioline.osu.edu. You can also request a copy from your local Extension office. Ohio State University Extension in Jefferson County can be reached at 740-264-2212 for questions regarding soil testing, interpreting soil reports, or to order soil test kits.
Hi, today I'd like to introduce you to black walnut, or Juglans nigra. Black walnut is arguably the most valuable hardwood tree species in eastern North America for the lumber that it produces. It produces a really dark colored, almost ebony colored wood in the heartwood. The sapwood's lighter in color, but the heartwood is absolutely beautiful. It makes fine furniture and cabinetry, and actually historically it's been used for gun stocks. To identify black walnut, you'll notice it has compound leaves that alternate on the twig. These compound leaves can be anywhere from about 12 inches in length up to about 24 inches in length, and they can have anywhere from about 10 or 12 leaflets up to about 24 leaflets. Notice I mentioned even numbers when I was talking about leaflets. Normally those numbers are odd. The reason for that is the terminal bud is usually missing on black walnut, and that's also a good ID characteristic to separate it from other compound leaf trees and even its cousin, the white walnut or butternut. These leaflets are opposite from one another, so they're somewhat paired normally, but again, the leaves alternate on the twig. If you crush these leaves, they've also got a really strong odor that's really unique for walnut. Another great identifying characteristic is a relatively large tan-colored terminal bud that has a few bud scales, and it's somewhat fuzzy. It'll also have these rounded lateral or side buds just above where the leaf attaches. And if we're to remove one of the leaves, you're going to see a leaf scar. Again, the leaf scar is the mirror image of the base of the leaf, and it has 3 distinct groupings of bundle scars and 3 lobes, and it almost resembles that the face of a monkey. So that makes it a great ID characteristic, a fun one to remember. Black walnut by, again, the face of a monkey. Twigs are pretty stout. Think about something that can have up to 24-inch leaves. It's going to take a fairly stout twig to support those leaves and the fruit that we're going to talk about here in a little bit. If you cut into the twig, you're going to see these open chambered. It's got what we call a chambered pith, which is unique to walnut and only a few other species. The black walnut pith is actually lighter in color. Its cousin, the butternut pith, is darker in color, but you'll see these big open voids or chambers in the pith of the twig. The fruit of black walnut can be relatively large, more than 2 inches in diameter when it's in the husk. This husk is a lime green color, and they're maturing right now. We're in about mid to late September. It's the 22nd of September today. You can see the squirrels are working these things pretty heavily. It's a lime green husk that completely encircles the nut. There are no splits or sutures in this husk like its cousins, the hickories, which have multiple sutures that split. This husk just kind of disintegrates over time, or like these are actually laying in my driveway and they've been run over by a car. And actually, believe it or not, that doesn't really hurt the nut that's inside. The nut that's inside is a very rough, ridged nut. It's dark in color once the husk falls off, almost black. And if you crack it open, it produces this wonderful nut that's great for human health. It's actually very heart healthy. Not many species of wildlife can actually benefit from walnut fruit because its nut is so hard that it takes something like a squirrel with those big teeth or other rodents to be able to break through that nut to be able to get to the fruit that's inside, the meat that's inside. I've also heard that turkeys can actually eat the whole nut and grind it up with their gizzard and get the nut from that as well, but it looks like it'd be hard to get that down the throat. Another great ID characteristic is this bark. It's usually dark colored. It's somewhat interlacing, and if you were to break just a little bit of the bark off, you're going to see a chocolate brown color just under the bark surface. Black walnut typically grows in floodplains, and it does quite well anywhere where you've got a deep, well-drained soil like a silt loam, and that's where you're going to get that big taproot development where this tree can actually produce or grow at its best. It likes or grows best in fairly light conditions. It doesn't grow in total shade, but if it's growing with enough competition, it does a really nice job of pruning itself up and losing these lower limbs, making nice clear lumber down there. And again, we mentioned how valuable the lumber is of black walnut. Historically, the lumber of black walnut is higher price per board foot than almost any species we can find out there. And if you're fortunate enough to grow walnut trees that produce veneer, the value can be very, very high. Again, this is black walnut, Juglans nigra. And again, take the time to spend at least part of your day in the woods.
Hello, I'm Ryan Slaughter, Research Assistant for the Small Fruit Specialty Crops team here at OSU South Centers in Piketon, Ohio. Today we'll be visiting a series of crops to give you an update on those, the research that we're doing, and the status of those crops. The crop that we're visiting now is thornless blackberries. This particular planting was established as part of the Specialty Crop Block Grant awarded by the Ohio Department of Agriculture and the U.S. Department of Agriculture. This trellis system may appear odd to some of you, but it is a well-established and growing way of trellising blackberries, especially for climates like ours, where extreme winter temperatures can damage the sensitive cambium layer of the blackberry canes. This trellis system is known as rotatable cross-arm trellis, or RCA for short. It was established, and this particular one was established as a training tool to show new and even experienced growers how to use and manage this system. The idea behind this system is to train 3 main shoots horizontally along the bottom wire. Once the cane has reached the next plant, the growing tip is cut or broken off, which forces lateral branches to begin to grow. Those branches, which will be the bearer of the main crop of fruit, are then trained vertically up these catch wires. In the winter time, this whole system can then be laid down flat on the ground and cover up with a floating row cover. In most cases, that is enough to protect the canes from the cold winter injury. In the spring, the arms are brought back up into a horizontal position until the flowers develop, and they'll all be upright towards the sun. Once that is done, then these arms are brought back in the position that they are in right now, and then all the fruit will then be on one side of the canopy. All the fruit being on one side of the canopy is great for harvesting, but with your trellis positioned correctly, shades the fruit from the hot evening westerly sun, which prevents sun scald on the fruit. Some growers position their trellises east to west so that once the arms are moved into this position, all the fruit is on the north side of the canopy and gets very little to no direct sunlight. This planting has 4 cultivars: a Ouachita, Osage, Triple Crown, and Natchez. These are all cultivars that we would recommend both for Ohio and for this system of trellising. For more information, please visit southcenters.osu.edu. Currently, we have a fact sheet on pruning erect blackberries, and we're working on a fact sheet that includes this RCA system. This next crop we're visiting is raspberries. This planting, along with our cultivar trial in another area, was established as part of the Specialty Crop Block Grant awarded by the Ohio Department of Agriculture, U.S. Department of Agriculture. As mentioned, in another area of our research and extension facility, we have a cultivar study that includes over 10 red, purple, and yellow raspberries. Some of those varieties are Royalty, purple, and a yellow, Tula Magic, and AAC Eden, both red. We also have some black raspberry varieties planted in another location. That includes Jewel, Niwot, and Ohio's Treasure. This particular planting here includes the cultivar Cascade Harvest, a red raspberry. As you can see, we have these planted on raised beds, constructed of treated 4x6 posts and nailed together using 12-inch landscape spikes, and braced on the inside of the beds using steel posts so that the soil doesn't cause the beds to bow out. We filled the beds with native topsoil amended with compost that we also purchased locally. Once these plants are well established, we will add a simple T-trellis with catch wires to help support the growing canes. The idea here was to show growers another option for growing raspberries or any other fruit crops. An ideal setting for a system like this might be if a grower doesn't have good enough soil or location to do normal field production, or even in an urban setting on a pavement in an unused parking lot. Another benefit to a system like this is that it raises the whole plant up, raising the fruit up to a higher level, and it makes harvest much accessible. For more information, please visit southcenters.osu.edu. Thank you.
Hello, this is the state tree of Ohio and the mascot for The Ohio State University. It's Ohio Buckeye. Ohio Buckeye has compound leaves. Leaves are palmately compound in that the leaflets attach to one point on the stem or the rachis, like the fingers at the palm of your hand. It's known as palmately compound. Typically they'll have 5 leaflets. Leaflets are normally between 3 and 6 inches long when they're mature. Leaves are also arranged oppositely. Where you have one leaf, there's typically one on the opposite side of the branch, just like your arms. You'll have one on each side of your body. That's where the buds occur too, the lateral buds. So that's where branches begin to form. So branches tend to be opposite. And you can look further back on the tree and you can see the larger branches are also paired or opposite from one another. Ohio Buckeye is known for its fruit and named for its fruit. And those fruit are occur after these spikes of flowers. You'll have these tall spikes with these light yellow colored flowers. These are done and spent, and you can actually see the buckeye starting to form. What we're seeing now is the husk. The husk is real spiny, and as that fruit matures, the husk kind of envelops the spines and you'll have a bumpy or warty husk. And inside that husk is the nut, which we're all very familiar with, the Ohio Buckeye. They tend to be maybe about the size of a quarter in diameter, ebony, real dark in color when they mature. Ohio Buckeye bark is really not very descriptive. There's nothing that makes it real easy. It kind of gets quirky. This one's starting to produce some splits in it as well. Ohio Buckeye typically occurs in most of Ohio, but it's much more predominant in the northern and western part of the state. In the southeastern part of the state where it's unglaciated, we tend to have more yellow buckeye, which we'll talk about later. It's a tree that can get to be relatively large. It can survive in the understory, but can also become a large mature tree, 60 to 80 feet in height. Again, this is our state tree, the Ohio Buckeye.